right, beautiful people. Welcome to the Stoa. Today we have a session called Awakening the Feminine and Honoring the Masculine with Fanny Norlin. Fanny is a coach and consultant who has worked in decentralized initiatives for the past 10 years and specializes in the role of how the feminine and masculine play for leaders. And as it says in her bio, she has created a framework that can help us cut through the cultural wars and distorted versions of both polarities and unleash the power and creative potential between them. Very juicy proposition. And today she's going to talk about her model. And I was talking to Fanny before, how I quite resonated with that piece, the 3-part piece that she has on her website. And I didn't really like feminine, masculine framings before because I felt they were too crude and weaponized in weird ways. But Fanny is a really good, precise model that adds more nuance. So I'm excited that she's here today and she's going to present on it or speak on it initially. And how today's going to work, I'm going to tag in Fanny in a moment. And then imagine I'll have a question or two, and then we'll pivot to Q&A. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and I'll call on you and I can take you in. You can ask your question to Fanny during the Q&A portion. And today's session is going to be scheduled for 60 minutes, but it might go 90 minutes. We'll just sense into the field and see where the energy wants to go. But there will be a session, post-session at Emergent Commons, which is a really cool community. And so that's going to be on a different link, and we're going to pop on that, and I'll talk about that at the end. So that being said, Fanny, welcome to the Stoa, and I'm taking you in.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, and thanks for having me. Really, it feels honored to be here. So I'm going to start by sharing a bit about my story to give some more kind of flavor and color to this framework or my perspectives on the feminine and masculine. And then, like Peter said, we'll have a conversation from there. So I've been interested in progressive leadership, decentralized organizing since I was at university. And at uni, I founded 2 larger student organizations based on self-organization principles, intuitively, before I knew that there was something called self-organizing, or I just was just really curious and experimenting with more that felt to me like more true and connected and powerful ways of creating things in a group together. And then I realized eventually that there was a whole school of this kind of way of doing business and of leadership. I got really into integral theory. I did my master's thesis on Keegan. I was really into art of hosting, which is some of the really early adopters to this emerging paradigm in leadership with David Soden, Theory U, complexity theory. And after uni, I really dove into working with the pioneers in the business world, but also in personal development, spirituality, also dabbled a bit in the realm of politics around kind of, maybe if I would use, explain it in a masculine way, kind of looking really both theoretically but really practically around how technology, internet, blockchain, AI, decentralized technology is radically changing us as humans and changing business and changing society. And maybe saying the same thing from a more feminine lens is how technology more and more is mirroring the complexity of life and how that's affecting us to live in this world. And throughout all this exploration, I was using a quite either like very masculine kind of lens and looking at the world and masculine approaches, or as I would see now, quite like incomplete feminine approaches. And I had this like deep intuitive sense that something profound was missing. Like it never really felt like the models or theories were like quite sitting fully right in me. And then about almost 6 years ago now, I was introduced to feminine leadership by my friend and now teacher Louise Alsen through her path Awakening Feminine Leadership. And through this path, I had this deep embodied tantric awakening. And already like during the first months of really like going deep into this practice, I could really, I like had a strong embodied sense that this like energy, life force, embodied presence, like this deep knowing that I was getting access to through my body, from a like this like turned on, powerful feminine place, that energy was like deeply something, was like that a big part of what I really felt was missing in these most of the progressive circles that I had been in. And then I didn't understand it intellectually. I just had this strong embodied feeling like, oh, like there's something deep here that feels really important. And yet, like in many, like Peter was saying, like in many progressive contexts or circles or spaces or theories or spaces, there's a resistance to the separation of the feminine and the masculine, or using these terms, and for many different reasons. And like also a younger version of myself, like I felt a lot of resistance, or I didn't feel the need to see the world in masculine or feminine. And for me, like a big part of my resistance was that I really didn't recognize myself as a woman in the feminine polarity that was presented to me. Because how we present the masculine and the feminine is, to me, often very one-dimensional and quite shallow. Like if you Google masculine and feminine leadership, masculine leadership will be like characterized by being like assertive, maybe even aggressive, like executing, driven. Whereas the feminine polarity is then seen as like the unifying, group focused, listening, nurturing, passive, receiving. And that like notion of femininity, I never felt at home with it. And being like, I studied engineering, been like in the tech world a lot. Also those feminine qualities weren't really, they were looked down upon. And also in myself, like I saw them as maybe like weaker or something. But then this like much fuller version of the feminine that does include the characteristics that I just described, but also got like this feminine that I was able to embody through Louisa's path, like this wild, like this sexual, sensual, wise, like a deep knowing of myself and the world, like this fierceness, but like a fierceness almost always like with a smile, like a powerful fierceness. To me, felt like such a homecoming. I was like, oh, okay, like this is something I vibe with. And I also realized that like when I started showing up from this feminine energy, like this feminine fullness, then like men and the masculine started to show up differently as well in response to me. Like when I stepped in with this like feminine power, like suddenly so many more men like stood so much taller, like became more grounded. Like there was this creative explosion in collaboration at work. And also like I deeply felt that I felt that they had my back. Like I've always had great relationships with men, but it was like a deepening of like, wow, like they really have my back. in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And what this made me realize, and firstly, it was really through like my own experiences, my through observation and experience of both myself, the other women in this practice, and the men, that like the masculine, the feminine aren't just in polarity with each other. Like just saying that is far too simple and doesn't serve either of them. But rather there's a strong polarity within the masculine, and the feminine is deeply cyclical. So I'm now kind of coming in to this model, and I'll share my screen for you guys to more easily follow what I'm saying. So starting with the masculine, we can see that, yes, there is this notion of the masculine that I then call the creating masculine, which is this kind of passionate, executing, driven, manifesting masculine. But there's also like the complete polarity, which I call the holding masculine, which has the energy of like just being super grounded and present in here, you know, like the energy of like a mountain or a tree, like just here, and like deeply sensing into and creating like clarity and direction, and like, and both of these energies are deeply masculine and like deeply in polarity with each other. And when it comes to the feminine, it is true that like parts of the feminine is this kind of unifying force that I call the holding feminine. So it's nurturing, responsive, it's like it's unifying, but that's only like half of the feminine cycle. And the other half is like the witch, the seductress, the wild woman. It's like the juicy, turned on, differentiating, alive feminine that is like the starting point of all life, that is like sourcing the life force. And the creating feminine and the holding feminine are not like with the masculine, they're not in polarity with each other, because they're like two sides of the same coin. Because if like the life force and the differentiating feminine, kind of the life force is what creates the fullness of the holding feminine, and it's the holding feminine that brings us back into the void that is the creating feminine, so that the cycle can start again. Like a good metaphor is that the holding feminine brings the nutrition back into the soil so that new life can be born. And the new life is what creates the new life that then enables the nutrition for the next cycle. So it's this deeply cyclical. And what I realized when I started showing up in this creating feminine is that there's like all four are deeply needed for any thriving creative process, whether that's a relationship, a project, society. So we need this creating feminine that is sourcing the life force, that is like bringing in the life. We need the holding masculine that is holding, listening, clarifying, sensing in and creating the direction. We need the creating masculine that is actually the manifesting force that takes action and builds. And we need the holding feminine to keep together and to guard the life cycle, to know when it's time to go back and start again. And what I see in most spaces in society is that from like the Industrial Revolution and kind of the society we're living in, we have a lot of this creating masculine, a lot of this executing, doing, manifesting, building. And it's like we have excessive amount of this energy or archetype. And this is what we usually speak about as toxic masculinity. And a lot of people then speak about, okay, we need more feminine energy to balance this up. But since the only feminine energy we talk about is this holding feminine, and when the holding feminine is not connected to the creating feminine, like when she doesn't have access to this life force, it also becomes like a distorted, almost collapsed version of the holding feminine that either, you know, becomes very collapsed or very reactive. And it's almost like a collapsed kind of mothering figure, either feeling completely like overblown by this toxic creating masculine, or trying to like subdue it and control it. And it's almost like this collapsed, distorted mothering holding feminine versus like the boyish toxic masculine. And there's just this like tension, deep tension and conflict between these two polarities. Which like society-wise, we see there's a lot of this like toxic masculinity in the alt-right, and there's a lot of this collapsed, either collapsed or reactive, distorted holding feminine in the in a lot of extreme left circles. Of course, making it very black and white, but like I hope you understand that you get the feel for this tension. And also, or just like in a business trying to be more decentralized. There's using just this like kind of ping pong between like the holding feminine trying to slow down and then realizing you have to do more, and then there's just this tension between. But what could be possible is when there really is this presence of this creating feminine that is difficult to explain with words, but it's this deep embodied presence that like brings in the life force. When this feminine is present, this then calls the masculine to step back into this holding masculine and really kind of hold space. And when the creating feminine and the holding masculine meet, then direction is created. And like a clear direction that is a direction that is in service of what wants to emerge, in service of life. And then the creating masculine is free to act upon this direction without becoming distorted or toxic, because it's just really building and taking action in service of what wants to be born. And in this manifestation phase, the holding feminine, when she's empowered by the creating feminine, she's like this panther figure that's just like that the creating masculine just has deep respect for, and keeps the group or the project together, and also make sure that like when it's done, and that we go back to the cycle, because the creating masculine just wants to keep going, just wants to keep building, keep doing. And the holding feminine, when she's empowered by the creating feminine, she can make sure that like, okay, the project is done, the website is built, whatever it is, now it's time to go back. So from a feminine perspective, this cycle would look like this, that we go from the creating feminine sourcing the life force. When it meets the holding masculine, direction is created in service of what wants to emerge. The creating masculine manifests and builds it, and the holding feminine then takes us back to the cycle. The masculine lens on the same process would be then that it starts in the holding masculine, get grounded, go down into the void of the creating feminine, get the inspiration, take up this inspiration into the holding feminine, make sure that the inspiration or the direction that you've got is actually serving the whole and serving the world. And once you know that, step into the creating masculine and build it, and then go back and repeat the cycle. And I really believe that this lack of the creating feminine and the holding masculine is like this lack of like the deep guidance, like the deep guidance that we need to be able to really do decentralized, network-based, you know, this world that is emerging with help like that internet is fueling kind of in society, because it is the creating feminine that creates this attractional field that kind of keeps the whole system together and is kind of guiding us to allow to go into the creating masculine in service of what wants to emerge and from a deeper guidance. And I think this is what you know, on a large scale is needed to create kind of the regenerative resilience, more organic network-based world. And maybe the last thing to say is that like this creative feminine, like that's very deeply connected to the female body and the female sexuality from a feminine perspective, not from a masculine, that it has anything actually to do with sex, but that it has to do with like female sexuality in form of like life force, that it's very difficult to put words on and to explain like in a presentation like this, both because we haven't known it or felt it or talked, allowed it to be part of leadership for many years, and because it cannot be explained through the rational mind. Like it has to be felt. And there's also, the holding masculine, maybe a bit easier to talk about, but it also has very like deep and intangible embodied aspects that are difficult to explain. But yeah, maybe we can get a flavor of the felt sense or the being of it, yeah, in this conversation. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to start off by sharing with you all. What was sparked in you, Peter, listening to this?
Yeah. Well, first, if anyone has any questions, pop them in the chat, or maybe do your hand raised emoji, and then we'll get you in a moment. So first, I guess like what struck me in a visceral way is just sort of like just resonance and like kind of like a nodding, a metaphoric head, and then the sort of the curiosity is delineating kind of like this, like the archetypes from gender, from sex, and then seeing kind of like the configuration between the three. So the archetypes are feminine, masculine, gender, male, man, woman, and then sex, male, female, and kind of the relationship between the archetypes and sex that you were gesturing to. Is it felt like in the last 3 years when I started this sort of like spiritual project of the Stoa, I've been oscillating between the holding masculine and felt more like creating feminine rather than creating masculine. Could be a category error, but I'm curious, like, what is your sense of like men engaging in the creative feminine and like women engaging in the holding masculine, and like what are the configuration space there?
Yeah, so this is it's such a rich question that requires a really rich answer. And like maybe just start off, I really believe that everything is fractal, meaning that like for any life to exist, like you need all four energies, like, and for every motion or, everything, every project, every person, everything, needs all four to kind of be an integrated being or to exist, basically, because these aren't like, the deeper I go, these are like the four energies of life. So it's like separation and unity and stillness and movement. So it's like the fundamentals of life, basically. So like regardless of gender or sex, everybody can tap into all four. And I really believe that we have like, there are social constructs, but that there also are biological differences between our bodies, and that like statistically most male-bodied people are just, it's like easier for them to tap into the male archetypes, and most female-bodied people, it's easier for them to tap into the feminine energies. And then I really believe that there are people in between who really are more fluid, and also like play an extremely crucial role, since it is so important to be able to play out the polarities, to have the people who also can flow in between, are very important. And it's quite, provocative in some spaces to take up these differences, our bodily differences. but I believe it's so important, and actually especially for women, because my experience is that the result of saying that the body doesn't matter almost always means, because we're so unused to this feminine embodied experience, like we have so little, and especially from like this more creating feminine, even if there's not really a split between the creating and the holding, but I would say this more like life sourcing, sexual, powerful. The holding is also powerful. Yeah, it's difficult to separate them, but kind of there's a flavor of the feminine that is like deeply missing in society and deeply missing in how we raise women. And so I see when we say that bodies don't matter, what happens is that like everybody has to adjust to the masculine body. So that's why it feels so important, even if it is provocative, to dare to take in, because it's just like we have a womb, like we can create life in our stomach, like that's pretty fucking amazing. And there's parts of the male body that is just really, you know, like the high levels of testosterone, they're just really made to like and like in the business world, women who really try to step into the masculine, often, since we don't have that much testosterone, often have to compensate with like stress hormones when we're trying to. And for me, like finding this feminine leadership has been a way of like finding a way that fits my body, to resource myself and yeah, show myself and be powerful. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. And the other thing I'll share, then we'll pivot to Q&A. Sort of the kind of it was more salient, this shame in the past, and less so in the last 3 years as I've been processing a lot of it. But this like constant pressure that I felt in order to be a man, in order to be creating masculine, and then like being a wussy if I was in like holding feminine. And I notice when the shame still pops its head, it's like when I'm not living up to those scripts, and then the story that, you know, I'm supposed to be embodying right now. And I'm curious what like the a female kind of version of that is like, maybe pressure to be in, let me know if this lands, like pressure to be in holding feminine, and then like the double duty, also pressure to be in creative masculine. And then if you're not like meeting that, then it's like you got your own version of shame. And what I'm seeing you're doing here is you're introducing a new narrative, a new alternative space that we can kind of like weave between the four, because I feel like I got reps in all four now, and so it's like, okay, where am I supposed to be at this moment in time?
Yeah, I think two things come up. One is like how important like the notion of like shadow work is in this, because if we have strong, any of the four strongly pushed into our shadow that like we really don't want to be perceived as, or you know, then of course like how are we going to interact with people who are showing up in that archetype? You know, to really be well integrated and have deep love and respect in yourself for all four energies in yourself, and to really in whatever way, you know, works for you, like remove the shame of any of the four, because regardless which one of them is your core archetype, if you have any of them in your shadow or feel a lot of shame of them, or regardless, then it's going to show up in your collaborations and etc. And I mean, it's in these culture wars, it's a lot of, you know, repressed different energies. And then to speak to the feminine version, like I think you're really speaking to it. And what is interesting is that like we talk so much about the toxic creating masculine, but the thing is that like a lot of the creating feminine shares similarities with the creating masculine. So if you take integral theory, for example, like the toxic creating masculine is seen as like, you know, the red, or like in spiral dynamics, or, you know, like the primal animalistic. But from a feminine perspective, like when I'm in my sexual energy, that's when I'm most enlightened. Like to me, that does not make sense that would be like some kind of primal low level consciousness. So by kind of shutting down the toxic masculine, we also very much shut down the feminine power. And then, as you say, again, like, especially, like in the business world, this thing of like being a woman, which maybe is then seen as the holding feminine, but then having to show up in the creating masculine. And yeah, really, really difficult to navigate, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's just models are landing in my system now, so this is great. All right, so let's get to Q&A. Mary Andrea, you had a question. You had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Give me a moment. And let me do this. Okay, I heard you say something. You were responding to a comment about Fanny, the shadow feminine, and it was a conversation. There was something about like pathos, logos, and mythos, and that the shadow feminine not knowing how to distinguish fact from fiction. And you said some kind of like yes, and like speaking to the nuance and the underlying deeper aspect of that, which is women being disconnected from their power.
Yeah.
And then going in this like, oh, merging and blah, and yeah. I really recognize that movement and with it. It's this kind of projection or encountering the implicit rules that for every felt sense you have, or knowing or expression of any kind, there needs to be this argument, or here's the thesis to why I'm saying this, here's the facts and data and blah. And I guess I would just love to hear you say more about that dynamic. And also remember reading in your articles, you mentioning how it was part of your personal journey, just like releasing the need to be understood by the masculine.
Yeah.
So I would just love to hear about that.
Yeah. Oh, I think this is so beautiful. I think this is like, I think this, what to speak to is like, there's like the virtuous or the vicious cycle between the masculine and the feminine, where like what you're speaking to first is like this vicious cycle where like the holding feminine doesn't have access to her power because we've never been taught how to do that. So the holding feminine, like acts out in a way, then looked on with critical, maybe masculine eyes is, just talking too much. It doesn't make sense. It's just stories. It's not connected to reality. It's new age, whatever it can be. But then, and then that feminine more of then looking at the toxic creating masculine, whoa, like you don't care. You're just building. You're just extracting from the world, like the masculine is the root of all evil, like this really vicious cycle when the masculine is directionless. The masculine doesn't have direction from the holding masculine because we have very few holding masculine role models broadly in society. So the masculine is quite lost, and the feminine is disempowered. And then but then the virtuous cycle, like that is so fucking beautiful. Like it's really just like in my own personal experience of when I can access this power or like access this feminine, like, and of course it's not anything I can like push a button on or ask, like it's really a practice and it's a surrender and it's a cyclical, like if it's not there, it's not there, and then there's nothing I can do about it. But like when it's there and when it's time to be there, when it wants to be there, then like how I just see men, almost being called in to step into this holding masculine, like, and show up. And I really think it's important what you said, like it's not about understanding each other. Like when I'm like, and I think I'm one of those who's quite fluid, so like maybe I have some hints from both teams and can kind of like, maybe that's why I can share this work. But like when I'm deeply surrendered, like in my feminine, like I can't at the same time be in the holding masculine. That's the thing, like, because then I lose like this connection to the life. They're like radically different ways of being in the world, and that's what's so mysterious and magical, that we'll never be able to understand each other. And I don't mean this as like a super literal sense that like men can't understand anything about women, and like, not at all, but like at this more like deep level, that there is a radical difference. The masculine is linear and the feminine is cyclical, and they're different, but and that's what creates the creative tension. Like that's what's like when these two can meet, and they can only meet momentarily, and they're like life can emerge, and then they're not meeting again, but like always wanting to come back to this meeting that is not some like utopian beautiful like ooh, like it's really the scariest thing, like the most intimidating thing we can do, and most courageous thing we can do, and really requires us to let go of layers and ego and all these things. And it's never permanent. Like it's you can't just arrive there and then you're there, it's this, and that's how life works, right? But this, yeah, that to this deep longing to start building these virtuous cycles in more places. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
All right. And we won't go in the order of when the questions come. Just gonna trust my intuition here. And Cheryl, we'll take you in next.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Fanny. I just really want to first communicate how much what you've so kind of like lucidly articulated is so true to my felt experience of these arising, like, feels like kind of new archetypes of the feminine and the masculine. And I find that it especially resonates when you're describing like the fractal nature of it. The fact that it's not necessarily like men are holding the masculine and women are holding the feminine. There is this dynamism that's happening where we can kind of dance across these different energies through the vessels of our bodies. And I was noticing something that was arising for me. I want to start it with just like a short personal tidbit, which is, I remember as when I was starting to tune in over the last 2-3 years into that kind of feminine, like it's like the creative feminine, that life force energy, that quality of aliveness, and almost like this wellspring of like, I love the way you describe it. It's just like this aliveness, this something that's, sometimes it feels like infinite, like you could just draw from it and pour it out into the field. And I have often kind of called it Eros, like it's just like life force. I am now a channel for life force. And then over time, I've also had to learn about what it means to be skillful and wise with that energy. And something that was coming up is, I think Peter was actually saying this before, it's like the concept of leaky Eros. And when, like for me, when I'm holding that much life force and it's kind of like pouring through, to not just like kind of surrender passively, kind of like be like, oh, this is just happening, I'm just like kind of pouring it out now, but to also have enough of the holding masculine in myself to gauge my situation, engage the context and the environment and the person in front of me, and what is actually like the wise way of kind of letting out just enough, like the titration, the ways in which you can, there is actually kind of like an attenuation to the pores, like how much to let out and when and how. So yeah, I think I just wanted to kind of bring in the aspect of like, as we're stepping into more of this like creative feminine capacity. It's like, what is the ethics? What is the responsibility? What is the skillfulness of holding that power?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a super interesting exploration. And like, as you say, like, I mean, in a sense, like, yes, maybe for our kind of, I don't know, shared reality or experience, like in these modern times, they're new, but of course they're not new, you know, like this is, they're always here, but it's like, how much access do we have them in our culture or in our personal experience? Or, but yeah, I think that also, to me, like, now only speaking to women, that why like the embodiment aspect is so important, and why it's so important to connect to, my teacher Louisa calls the vagina the jewel, like, and we talk about like the jewel force and the jewel connection, and it's like so much about like jewel, like being present there. And there's I won't go, like, there's like different aspects of that, but like, because it's so much shifting from, which is, you know, again, like a lot of how the creating masculine, the creating feminine can be seen as the same thing, but they're really different, that it's actually quite egoistic. Like, you could label it as egoistic of being in this creating feminine as a woman, because it's so much about not doing it to serve others. Like, we're so like, and we have these mirror neurons, and we're so into like, you know, that I should, every time, you know, I think that like, ooh, this place needs eros, like I'm gonna share my eros with this place, then my jewel is like, no, like, why? Like, you know, like, and to me, it is really this holding masculine, but to me, it's really, I can't be like, okay, now I'm going to bring in my holding masculine. It's like, it's about like activating this jewel force, activating, like going into this, like, and that will call in my inner holding masculine and outer holding masculine to do that. And also it guides me in like, yeah, if my jewel says yes, then I say yes thing. And that's why this like embodied practice for women that like nobody is teaching us is so important, just because it's so potent things that is like really playing with fire, like, you know, it's what creates the world, like, it's so like this. Connection to our bodies, embodied connection to our jewels and the sexual energy, and being around other women who are also having this practice or in this space, like that's it's so difficult to do this by ourselves. And I love that beautiful paradox that it's so individual. It's about like, it's what am I desiring, what makes me come alive, what, like, we talk a lot about like, what am I longing for, like, what's my desire, rather than serving out, like, really, what am I longing, like, what turns me on, like, what, you know. And that it's, so in that sense, it's like very, you could, you know, back to this, like, if being egoistic or individual, that is, but it's such a collective practice, because when I tap into that place, other women feel that, and they allow themselves to tap into their desires and their longings and their aliveness and then they also start becoming channels for eros. And then it has like the quality in like Louisa's path, it has like a pureness and an innocence and a heart connection that I don't know, creates this that just creates this, I just feel so guided, like I don't have to worry about if I'm doing too much or do not, because it's just a deep knowing, because it's in my body, kind of thing. But it is my inner holder masculine navigating, because I'm calling him in from embodying it, if that, but yeah, really beautiful, important, and really exciting exploration. Like, how do we do this? Like, I'm also, so curious, and like, and also, Leslie, I want to say, like, so it really fills me with joy every time I speak to another woman who's also exploring with this, and navigating these fiery waters. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Mark, you had a question. You're going to unmute yourself and ask it.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I just wanted to say, though, from before I ask the question, this whole idea of I'll start my video. Okay. All right. Yeah, this whole idea of the holding masculine and the creative feminine being missing, kind of like from the public spaces. I have the sense that we, as much as the creative feminine needs to show up in this space, in these spaces, the holding masculine, the true holding masculine needs to find a way to manifest. But at the same time, I was wondering, how do you think the creative feminine would show up in men? And do you think it would make them less attractive? Because I have that same feeling of shame, associated with that. And it's kind of like the feminine traits are really not welcomed in either men or women. You don't have like women saying, like, yeah, I nurtured the shit out of that meeting, it's like you're a badass. It's not, the other traits aren't celebrated like that. So yeah, just if you could, talk on both of them.
Yeah. Yes. So again, like I really believe that there are people who just love like rocking the fluid, just rock being everywhere, and I mean, like I have a male friend who just has this like inner like seductive women, and he like dresses up in girls' clothes, and you don't have to dress up in clothes, that doesn't, but like when she's there in him, I'm like, yes, and she just is super sexy. Like there's nothing, I mean, it's because that's just him, and also because he's so shameless in it, as you say. So I definitely believe that it can show up in, yeah, that all four can show up in everybody, and that there are people who are like super fluid. And I believe that like most men kind of, if you want to make it spiritual, like kind of are here to kind of serve from the masculine, and that so I don't know you, so I don't know which one of them is true for you, and you have to feel into that yourself. But generally speaking, I feel so often that holding masculine traits are labeled as feminine when they're actually super masculine, and just a different kind of masculine than we know of. So I'm often wary of telling a man that he needs to become more feminine, because I often, like in so many cases, it's that like, yeah, it's that what he perceives as, yeah, it's just because of these shallow ways of looking at the masculine and the feminine, yeah. Did that speak to your, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, especially the thing that's got me interested now is how holding masculine could be seen as feminine, and then men would become ashamed of it, and because they're not in touch with their bodies, and it's not confirmed in our body,
Yeah.
then we would see it as something that's wrong, and maybe the world would confirm that for us too, that
Yeah.
it's wrong because it doesn't fit what's out there and celebrated right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and like the rite of passage, I believe, for men is, kind of, I mean, if you, yeah, maybe I'll share my screen quickly. Like if you, so looking at like kind of the masculine journey, it's like starting in the mother, the holding feminine, going out into the world, into creating masculine. And then the rite of passage is to step into the holding masculine. And like, there's no rite of passage right now for men of like truly stepping into the holding masculine to be able to really be of service in the world. And it creates, you need a lot of like strength and holding and like, but also skills in listening and having a huge open heart. So it's both this like deep sensing and openness and heart and power and direction that is like the beautiful qualities of the holding masculine, of this deeply listening and being able to create direction. Yeah, if you want to share that.
Yeah, the last thing I'd say is if that becomes a thing that women are attracted to, then that would save the world, because men will become anything that women are attracted to. You know, that shifts the world.
This is again, you know, back to these vicious and virtuous cycles that like, I don't like, a lot of women are like stuck in this kind of distorted, collapsed holding feminine. And then they're not asking men to go into the holding masculine, because if I'm not in my power, then I can't meet a man in his power. And likewise, like, so that's like the kind of tragedy of our society. But what's like the flip side of that is that both can initiate the dance. So like the holding feminine or the holding masculine can, like, even, you know, if the distorted holding feminine is projecting stuff onto you and like, oh, you bad man, da da da, if you just like hold your ground and like, oh, like whatever shit you throw at me, I'm here, I'm standing, I'm ready to listen, I'm ready to hold space for you, I'm ready to be here. And when you're ready, then that can make the nervous system of the feminine relax and like, okay, I don't have to fight. He's listening, he's here. And then this creating feminine can start emerging, and it can be called. And likewise, the creating feminine, even if a man is really in is kind of then maybe more boyish, toxic masculine, the feminine can like go into the fierce creating feminine, like start sourcing, and the men were like, whoa, what is this, and start stepping back. And of course it's not true for everybody, and again, like Chris, I don't remember, Cheryl was saying, like, to be wise about when you show yourself or not in these different situations, both for men and women. But like, there is potential for this virtuous cycles in so many more places than we think, if we just have the courage to be the one to be the bigger person, take the first step, which is the most intimidating thing both the masculine and the feminine can do, because we can be brutally rejected by each other, and then we've shown the most, deep part of ourselves to the other.
Just
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I won't share that. I might go on a tangent. Pamela, you had a question. Pamela, you still with us? Yes, she is. Your question was good. Maybe we'll circle back. Madalena, you had your hand up.
Hi. I really want to sort of underscore that more than zeroing in on how you name, I feel like what you're naming is relation. I mean, that it happens in relation. It's not a thing in itself. And I think that that's really the important kind of epistemological shift, because it goes away from the subject object and even, the performance of individuals, that can be optimized, and self-improvement and all this stress on that, when what is happening is a dynamic, changing self and other that hasn't been able to happen historically. It's happened mostly hysterically, and I think that I would like to ask Peter, because I think a lot of your reflections on this from meme to vibe could offer sort of insight in, because I feel like what Fanny mostly conveys is a different vibe. That's what I feel when I hear her speak and articulate. It's a different vibe. And if we get too analytical about it, I think we miss sort of the momentum of the exploration that's needed from these mandates, whatever the masculine mandate and the feminine mandate have been. And we need all hands on deck. I mean, what we're living through requires all hands on deck, so that from meme to vibe, I think Peter could offer some weaving with what Fanny in the wisdom that you're exploring. Thank you.
It's funny that that was the thing I was going to share, was related to the vibe shift. So maybe I'll just bring it in. Yeah, I noticed when I'm going to holding masculine mode, and then I'm with a woman who, let's say the default is holding feminine, and maybe she's projecting somewhat, well, he's like, he has an impressive beard, maybe he's toxic masculine or something like that. But if I stay in the holding masculine, there's a vibe shift that happens. And then something else gets invited in that's non-propositional. But it's a different energy. There's a thing like when I'm in holding masculine, and then the woman's in creating masculine. And then there's like kind of a weirder vibe there that like feels like a different toolkit is needed to be responsive to. But I'm very kind of curious, putting myself in those situations more. Curious what comes up for you with that, Fanny.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think I mean, as soon as there's not polarity, kind of, there's, and it doesn't matter if it's the man or the woman, or, you know, or who's doing what, but yeah, that there's polarity between the holding feminine and the creating masculine, and there's polarity between the creating feminine and the holding masculine. So like when the polarity is not there, the potential for this vibe that we're talking about, like this life, this feeling, this being, is not there. I really liked what you shared as well, Magdalena, and maybe not challenging, but I think there's something so like to also, like, I'm speaking very much from a feminine lens because I think it's needed and important and often lacking, and there's not a lot of people, as you say, who are speaking from a feminine lens, because the feminine lens doesn't really need to be spoken about. Like exactly what you're saying, like it's a felt experience, and like I was working when I been working out in organizations, I don't speak about this at all. I just show up and things happen. Like I don't use the words in the, like when I've have leadership roles in business context or such. And like, I think there is something beautiful about words and beautiful about understanding. And the thing is, like, what you're talking about, like the relational is very much like the feminine, the cyclical, everything is ever changing, nothing. And this is actually more true. Like, you know, this is like, we're talking about the mythos, this is reality. Like, of course it's ever changing. And we're going towards a society with internet, you know, as I was talking from a feminine lens, that technology is more and more mirroring the complexity of life, like the realness, the trueness of life. And that's from a feminine perspective. And the masculine perspective is also very needed and so beautiful and so helpful. And this is like the gift that the holding masculine is giving us, that being able to listen and tap into this flowing, ever emerging, and then to say, okay, I've listened, let's take this direction and box in reality into a reality. The holding masculine knows that this is not reality, but for us to be able to do something and actually, you know, build something, we can't be in this flowy state. So I know that the direction I'm creating is not really true, but it's the best I can do right now. And to take that direction and to create that, and then to go back and listen when it's time to listen. So yeah, I want to bring in that like really also honoring the masculine, and I'm not necessarily only saying honoring men. I'm saying the masculine kind of worldview or way that is linear, that is about progress, that is about evolution, where the feminine is more the life-death cycle, and actually probably the feminine is more true, but the masculine is very valuable to create society, and both are deeply needed in dance with each other. Kind of.
I have to disagree there, just a little bit.
Yeah,
you know,
disagree
yeah.
away.
No, I mean, I think, you know, that's pretending to know what's true is already a problem. I mean, it's different to find the next right thing to do is in the fog of trying to figure it out. But I think the important thing perhaps is that precisely because what I've becoming to call the great confinement, you know, where we were all sent home, is trying to understand what this domesticity is all about, you know, because here's Mary Andrea trying to participate in this and holding a baby. That's holding, but it's not just the holding feminine, you know, it's the holding of life, you know, and that I think needs to be in some ways not above gender, but underneath it, meaning there's a fundamental unity of life itself. And now there's studies that prove that men that are involved in labor have the same oxytocin release that women do, you know. So we need to distribute that being doped up in oxytocin from caring and not call it a privilege of one or the other. I mean, because it could be fun, okay? Not because there's an obligation or right wrongs, but because it could be fun to explore. So I think it's we have to be very careful. Oh, honor men, oh, honor women. I mean, we go right back to, you know, unraveling, you know, where we've been, which is not to be disregarded, but it's only been described a certain way that's worked for Procrustean industrialization, basically. It sells shit.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for bringing in that perspective. And like, to me, what always is important is like what brings most life, what feels like right. So like, you know, I'm always the first to say, like, scrap everything I say and like feel into deeply what feels most alive right now and go there. So yeah, thanks for bringing in that perspective.
And Fanny, we're at the top of the hour. Do you want to take one or two more questions, or shall we gently close here?
If there's some more questions, I'm fine with staying on a bit longer.
All right. There's a few questions. Cheryl, did you have a? Well, there's a Daniel. Daniel, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. And sorry if it's a bit noisy. I'm in a library at the moment. I wrote my question on the chat, but I wanted to ask how to practical support and heal suppressed feminine energies in us or others, and at the same time, how to nurture this the wake up of masculine new energy that arises. So yeah, I feel quite overwhelmed,
yeah,
personally. So, but yeah, and in some cases, and yeah, I feel like I'm nowhere, or there is no balance between these energies.
Yeah, like when you ask that question, like a feeling of like overwhelm, of like how do we, yeah, how do we heal the creative feminine? It's just like, woof, like I don't know, yeah, I really don't know where to start. And I also, I don't know, but for me, I think we're so immature with these things in our current society. So I think that rather than like thinking about what can we do for others, I think my advice is always just to like start with yourself. And maybe this is what you were asking as well. But yeah, and I think that like our bodies and our hearts are just like such a good guiding place. And I don't know if I like, yeah, feel comfortable in like saying general, because the humans are so complex and diverse. And but I mean in general, what's helped me, and maybe I can share like as a woman, is yeah, to like embodiment, and to connect with yet like to really deeply reconnect with my sexuality in like a deeply spiritual way, like to together with other women get the practices and the guiding to really allow my body to be more open and free, and to connect to my jewel, to connect to this life force energy that's there, and yeah, so that's my personal, for me. Yeah, and I don't even know if I want to like say what you should do as a man in your experience, because I know so little about your life. Yeah, I feel
Thank you.
uh,
I wanted to express this yeah, overwhelming feeling. But yeah, thank you for your answer.
leaning into that, just want or longing, or like connecting to it, is just, yeah, such a beautiful first step.
Thank you.
All right, let's maybe do one more question. Sean, are you still in the room? Yeah, you are.
Not sure if this is still as alive, but I'll try to restate it as was expressed. I'm curious about what it's like and the difference of it when one accesses these energies within themselves and allows the channel of it to shift and flow in their creative process, versus in comparison to being in the presence of others in collaboration of any kind of work, and what the difference could be like in the magnitude. Because if you're in your holding masculine and being in the presence of a creative feminine, you just could feel that inspiration and magic palpably, versus like working within the internals of yourself and going through that figure eight in whatever direction feels right. I'm also curious about just like an imaginary of, if you were in a kind of situation in a team of four, though things are ever changing and dynamic, have you ever been exposed to something like someone embodying each of these particular energies and allowing that kind of thing to synergize? What kind of possibilities are there when people sink into these energies in that kind of team dynamic?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So yeah, the first one, I think to me, it's just again like with this fractal nature that like the more polarity there is in between the four, whether that's in yourself or between people, like the more you can, you know, the bigger kind of 8 you can make, the more energy and creative energy there is. Yeah, and also the difficulty of holding like all 4 in the same person at the same time. That there's just, yeah, there's a lot of magic that can happen if it's different people kind of holding them and playing together. And to answer to your second question, like I co-led a team for a couple of years, yeah, at an e-commerce, and we played around with these, or we actually, it was really not conscious. It's not, this was before I had started kind of thinking even in the model, but how we showed up and the kind of the team members that we hired and attracted, like we had all 4 in the team. And you know, this is nothing new. If you guys know of like dragon dreaming, like these 4 energies show up in like almost all leadership models. But the difference is that even if you can have models about it, but if they're not embodied, like if the energy, the presence is not there, like it's not the models that are important, it's the lived experience. And I experienced being in a team where there were people who were really like embodying these energies, and it was different people in different times, and some had some main archetypes, and you know, we can go into that. But yeah, me and Victor, who work together, like we've kind of developed a project leadership method or model based on that experience that we call fractal development, because of this fractal nature, that is just really like the practice is to deeply like flow in this 8. And this also about these virtuous cycles, that like it's not that the creating feminine is always, you know, what's needed. It's no, the different energies are needed in different parts of the phase, and realizing what part of the phase am I in, and really allowing that energy that is most crucial in that phase to lead. And it's a truly magical experience to work in this way. Like it's yeah, I mean, the people in our team, like to me, it was the best team experience I've had. And it was so cool as well, because we weren't working with, you know, people who had done, you know, personal development for 20 years and were like in the deep spiritual practice. Like we were working with website coders, but just, yeah, so it's yeah, I feel I'm rambling a bit now, but I hope I spoke to some of your question at least. But yeah, I really, yeah, I really recommend and like reach out if you want to have guidance in exploring that. But I mean, yeah, basically that's what I feel really called to do, to bring in all of these energies. And my realm is a lot in the business world, to create initiatives that are deeply serving what wants to come alive right now in the world, and that are deeply fun, and basically experiencing this virtuous cycle between the different energies, which is like, I think, the most profound and deep thing we can do as humans. And to be able to do that at work is quite exquisite.
Awesome. So we'll be closing here. We do have a follow-up session in a different Zoom room, which I'll mention in a moment. But Fanny, do you have any anything came up for you for today, this exchange that was salient for you that you'd like to share, and any parting words you would like to leave us with?
Feeling quite like empty and content, and I don't think I have that many words left in me. I think, yeah, maybe what's mostly here is just gratitude and feeling like really, yeah, like touched and honored that so many people have spent this time like taking in and sharing and discussing and diving into the conversations. Yeah, and maybe just end like with an invitation, like if any of this resonated and you feel called to explore, like please get in touch, because yeah, I'm really longing to experience more of this in the world, and yeah, we need to do it together. So yeah, please get in touch.
Beautiful. Yeah, definitely check out Fanny's work and the articles that are linked in the event description. I'll put that also on the YouTube description if you're watching this right now. I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but Fanny, thank you so much for coming to Stoa today. It was great to have you. Got some upcoming events at the Stoa, which you can check out the stoa.ca. The Meme to Vibe one that was gestured, Amy Paulson's going to come in and talk to me about it, so you can check that out. And we're having Mari, would you like to jump off mute and kind of just talk about maybe briefly Emergent Commons, what that is, and then mention the link that we're going to jump into in a moment?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, we're a volunteer-led, member-led community. There are actually a lot of people from Emergent Commons here at this meeting, and we our tagline, sense making together for a more connected world. So we have a lot of groups of different kinds of groups, different interests. We have a place, Mighty Networks, for having asynchronous conversations, as well as a place to be able to host meetings. And so we have a couple of coffee house Zoom rooms that people can jump in for meetings. But we have all sorts of crews, sense making, grief, astrology for sense making. There's so many, plants and molecules. And so we're in a way a community of smaller communities, and in a place for emergence. Whatever's alive, what comes alive, anybody can host anything. We're truly member led, and yeah, the after session will be starting at the top of the hour.
Very cool. So yeah, copy and paste this link, and we're going to jump over to it now, and Mari's going to lead that. And yeah, Fanny, everyone, thank you so much coming to the Stoa today.